98% of the average person's thoughts are negative.
I'm a failure. I'm stupid. Those I am statements, they're super powerful, yet we just tend to throw them away.
In this world, we tend to look at people who have success and we think that they got there because things were easier for them or they were given opportunities. I realized they got them because when things got hard, they didn't give up. They didn't stop. They ask themselves, what can I learn from what just happened? You need to go from 98% to 97%. We can all start to make those little steps to redefine whatever we think is success for us in our life. Sometimes the best way to learn how to navigate through something is to watch someone else do it. And what is a guide if not someone to show you the path? Did you know that 98% of the average person's thoughts are negative? Have you ever felt that way? That you are trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts that you just cannot escape from? It can feel like a complete uphill battle. And that's why I wrote Silence Your Inner Critic. This book is a way to begin to chip away at those negative thoughts, to find your way through that negative brain bias that can make you feel like there is no winning. You can take steps proactively to begin to reprogram those negative thoughts in a fun way, in an adventure that is heroic. This book has an epic quest that's a superhero adventure between your villainous inner critic and your inner hero that is your inner champion. It's fun, interactive, and I will be your gal in the chair all the way along. So if you're ready to embark on this epic journey and chip away at that 98%, then head on over to silenceyourinnercritic.com, place your order, and begin to receive all of the bonus content that you'll get for being one of the early adopters. Again, that's silenceyourinnercritic.com. Place your order and begin to receive tons of fun and engaging content to get you started on your epic journey today. For some reason in this world, we tend to look at people who have what we consider success, and we think somehow that they got there because the things were easier for them or they were given opportunities, and maybe in some cases that's it. But now at this point in my life, I have had an opportunity to learn that most of the individuals I've met who have achieved levels of success, as I define success, not necessarily only monetarily, but achieving goals that they set for themselves or having the connections with individuals that they care about and maintaining those connections for long periods of time. Things that I would see in my life that would be success for me. I realized that they didn't get those because they had opportunities that I haven't had, or that things were easier for them. They got them because when things got hard, they didn't give up. When things went sideways, they didn't stop. They always stayed focused and didn't go down with the punches and stay down. They persevered. They picked themselves up every time. And each and every time they ask themselves, what can I learn from what just happened? We came into this podcast with a different topic, and I'm sure we'll get to that topic at some point. But we pivoted because we just encountered one of those same moments. And I think it's important for all of us to take a moment and step back and ask, what's keeping us from whatever we think is success for us in our life? And are we part of that? So, do you want to share any little bit of what happened? We don't have to go into the full thing, but like just that there was, well, I'll let you share.
Yeah, just had a really great podcast. Was so excited about it, and I realized that I didn't press record on one of the cameras, and it's kind of important to have that recorded. Otherwise, it's not a full podcast because there are multiple cameras, and that was kind of the main important one. So yeah, not necessarily a supporting camera, but like a main camera. So yeah, really bummed out because it was a really great conversation.
And it's okay because we'll have that really great conversation again. But that's just it. When we have moments that kick us in the teeth, what are we going to do?
Go to the dentist. Definitely.
That would be a good choice.
Yes.
But this is a huge part of it. We have to laugh and find a way through it. Otherwise, it's going to push us down, right? And it's so easy given that we were talking about this statistic too. 98% of the average person's thoughts are negative, right? And then something goes sideways. And of course, the first thing that negative thought or that inner critic wants to do is go, see, I told you.
I mean, we were talking about how how is, when something is negative, and 98% is a lot of thoughts.
Uh-huh.
And then people are like, well, we'll be positive. Look at the bright side. It's like, well, it's really hard to do that with only 2% capacity.
Uh-huh.
So, it feels like a complete uphill battle.
Yes.
Like, how could I move the needle with 2%? When does that ever happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You just want to take that person that's telling you, like, well, just think positive and go and punch them, right? Because I know you probably had to be feeling that way toward me in the moment where I was like, come on, you got to turn this around. In the moment, it's like, but I don't feel like turning it around.
Yeah.
Because this thing just happened. It all just went sideways. And the worst thing that I thought could happen just happened. And of course, now that negative brain bias is being fed, and it's like, nom, 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 nom. But that is the exact moment when the people that I started to learn from and said, okay, if you desire to get to what you consider a success metric, you don't have to go from 98% to 50%. You need to go from 98% to 97%. How are you going to go from 98% to 97%? You're going to recognize real time in the moment when it's happening, and you're going to go, okay, I can turn this around. How can I turn this around? I don't have to stop feeling like this is sucky, but I have to take a moment to go, what am I going to do to shift this moment? And suddenly that 98% becomes 97% because you shifted one moment. It's like the Grinch, right? In the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, it's like instead of going down this way, his heart went this way. Well, you're going to go this way instead, and you're going to see it start to drop every moment when you start to catch it and you start to shift it, and you start to catch it and you start to shift it, and you start to catch it and you start to shift it. And then what you've been searching for here, that success of whatever it is, suddenly starts to move toward you. And so instead of you going after it, it starts coming toward you because it's like a magnet that attracts.
Although when you feel more positive, you definitely feel less like the Grinch.
That's true. Although he seemed pretty positive there toward the end when his heart got really big.
This is very true. This is very true. Yeah, it's tough because we still have feelings, like we want to feel the feels,
Mhm.
and we've talked about this when it comes to mastery.
Yeah.
It isn't the elimination of something. It's more or less, how quickly you can move through things.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to personal development, there's all these, mastery level this and mastery level that. And a lot of it is like, well, I've mastered the ego, or which is a funny, ironic statement in the first place. I've mastered this or I've mastered that, right? And it's like I've eliminated something, some aspect of me, and that makes me a master of it. And I just don't align with that at all. And and I know you don't, and that's kind of what we've talked about in other podcasts. We've talked about how mastery is about your ability to move through it quicker, instead of it. And then this mistake that I made, it isn't like a make or break. It isn't the end of the world. It isn't, there's a lot of worse things that are happening in this world than me not pressing the record button,
Exactly.
on a good podcast. It's like, it's frustrating because we are so busy right now and there's so much going on, and like every minute is counting right now. And so there is a sense of that. And so the feeling is real.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, to me, in this moment, it is the worst thing that could happen, because that is what is happening. Right.
Yeah.
There's that saying that, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, because there's variations of that relative to life experience. Right. And in that moment, I was feeling it. I was really feeling all the feels. It was my opportunity to, just move forward and just know that, like, hey, it's not to let that inner critic, like, oh, I just disappointed, I'm wasting your time, or just all these other things that were going through my head that I probably shouldn't repeat on camera, that or have moments
Insert emoji
it's,
with all of the things over its mouth right
yes,
here.
exactly. But yeah, it's because we're human, and this happens, and it's going to happen. I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to probably not press record again, and
Yeah.
because it's been a trend, and it's the only one who's done that in 160 some episodes is me, multiple times.
It's
And it's
okay.
happened. Although I'm in a streak where it hasn't happened in a while, so
That is true.
yes.
So celebrate your successes. That's another way to change that brain bias.
Exactly. Um, and so back to the point. Uh, yeah, us like really allowing ourselves to feel, but having that ability to consciously pivot and move into what's needed next.
Yes.
And not from a chaotic standpoint, or from like a frantic or anxiety or fear, but maybe in like a GSD kind of a standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
um, but it's like a conscious and purposeful, and say, okay, like, no, I've got this. Let me move back into confidence. Let me move back into, you know, I I am not a failure in this moment. I experienced a moment of failure. Those are two very different things. The former is a lasting result, and the latter is a blip of one's life.
And to me, that is the key to take away from this. I do want to take a little sidebar for anyone who doesn't know what GSD means. I'll use the clean version, the G version. It's get stuff done.
Nice.
If you want the more adult version, I'm sure you can figure out the substitute for stuff. So, heading back to the main track now, we tend to so easily get caught in the I'm a failure and identifying with the outcome. It's not even the action, it's the outcome, right? We're trucking along, things are going toward the goal that we think will make us successful, right? So we've not only identified with the actions, we've also identified ourselves with the outcomes. So now we are identifying ourselves as who we are. Like, I am not my actions, I am not my outcome. those are byproducts of the being that I am, right?
Mhm.
So now I've flipped that, as we call, flipped that script, and now everything is outside of me instead of inside of me. And so I am just feeding and feeding that negative brain bias, and it is so happy as, okay, great. So now all I have to do is cause her to act in one small way that isn't in alignment with who she actually is. And I get to feed more negative brain bias. So maybe I can move that 98% to 98.2%. So I'm going to trend upward instead of trending downward. And I get more fuel. And that's going to throw her off from the actual goal that she thinks is going to make her successful. So now that's moved. I've moved to the target there. So now I can move one more action because she's already on a cascade effect. So she figures, well, if I failed there, then of course my next action's going to fail because, that's what always happens to me. So now, oh, well, I forgot to push record on the camera. So, because that's what always happens to me. So I'm sure that I'm going to mess the next thing up too. So then, of course, what happens? Self-fulfilling prophecy. And I end up making another mistake. And so the very thing that I thought would be success, which is, oh, I'm going to film a great podcast and not disappoint him, because my goal is to not disappoint him, then I've failed on all fronts. So now I'm a failure. Wow. Where do our thoughts go from there? How can you ever feel like a success in yourself if everything depends outside of yourself, right? And we do that to ourselves. So we're like in this prison. And I did it to myself for a very long time, especially when I worked in a corporate environment. My whole knowing of myself and how I was going to be successful was based on everything that was outside of me. So, I get it. I really do. But if you can begin to take those moments and flip that back inward and know that you not pushing record on the camera, feel the feel of feeling disappointed that that didn't happen, but it doesn't have any reflection on you being an amazing human being and the best partner in the world.
Mhm.
Like, it has nothing to do with that. And if we can all start to make those little steps to redefine, one, what is success to us, and two, to begin to separate out our actions and end goals from defining who we are, I think that really matters.
Thank you, babe. Those beautiful words, and absolutely, it's an incredible skill. That's probably everyone needs to some degree. Even those who have spent a lot of time, it's hard. It's so hard not to place something outside of ourselves on us or within us.
Yeah.
Those I am statements. It's fascinating because they're super powerful and they're very profound. Yet we just tend to throw them away by saying, I'm stupid or I'm a failure or, you know, X, Y, and Z. That isn't truth. And those are throwaway comments, but we don't recognize how powerful they are.
Why
And
am I so bad at this?
yeah, yeah. Why is everyone else achieving this and I'm not?
Hmm.
It's like those are there's so many ways that we phrase these power statements,
Hmm.
and so no wonder we're in the average of 98%,
Yeah.
because if we're so busy telling the world, our inner world, and therefore our outer world, what we're not, then how can we have any awareness of who we are?
And I want to thank you for being willing to just pivot pivot
Mhm.
and
Insert Ross. Up the
insert
stairs.
Ross Geller right now. But to pivot and be willing to be vulnerable and share, because I don't ever want those who are listening to our podcast or come to our events or support us as we're supporting them in any way to think that we don't experience the same things that they do, because we all experience these things. We're just offering tools that we've either created, acquired, just because we know and we've used them. They assisted us so deeply, and we know that they can assist others, and we want to share. We've used them in coaching, we've used them in family settings. So we just want to help. That doesn't mean that we ourselves don't have our own moments, and we want to be vulnerable and transparent in sharing those with the community as well, so that they can simultaneously see how we navigate through them. Sometimes the best way to learn how to navigate through something is to watch someone else do it, right? And what is a guide if not someone to show you the path? So thank you for being willing to be a guide real time, because this literally just happened 5 minutes before we hit record on this one.
Pain is real.
So you were actively navigating the pain.
Yeah, it's still there a little bit, not gonna lie.
Still a little
Still
fresh.
really frustrating, still very fresh. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, yeah, I mean, this isn't there's a lot more vulnerable things I could dive into that are very painful. But
Just rip the Band-Aid off, baby, go for it.
But I do appreciate you pointing this out, and yeah, because it is like just happening, and we are doing there's a lot of doing right now in terms of our actions. Um, as we are really ramping up and Sweetwater is really taking the next level, a lot of our time is focused. I mean, we don't have a lot of downtime right now. And so, redoing an episode when we just spent the time to create it is just, it's like, oh, there's another thing, right? I feel those things too. Like in the moment, I was like, "God, I feel so stupid. And here I am. Like, I mean, we have a podcast in this. I contributed to this book. Amber and I've had tens of thousands of conversations on this. I've been doing this for, more than a decade. Like and it still happens. And even in the silliest thing, and ultimately, I'm probably not even gonna really remember this other than the fact that it's now on YouTube forever. So
now
I guess
officially
yeah.
on all of the podcast platforms, and people are going to come up to you and say, I remember the episode where you said you felt stupid.
Yeah. Thanks, babe. That could have been a moment that just left my memory, and it could have been safe and good in life and everything. But now it is on the internet.
See, I don't have to remind you. Other people will do it for me.
Thank you.
To me, it's important so much that everyone understands how, just how open you are, and that you're willing to share these things too. And so am I always. But two, that I could actively see you kind of self-deprecating, right? You were quiet. You were stone quiet. You weren't saying anything until I was like, "Okay, we're going to need to move through this if we're going to film another podcast." And you were like, "I just need a minute." Like, okay, yeah, he's over there doing all of the internal negative self-talk.
Mhm.
And we just did a podcast talking about how to not do that. And we're getting ready to film another podcast about tools to work through it. So why don't we just real time talk about how no matter how much you have all the tools in your arsenal, that doesn't mean that that inner critic won't rise up and go, gotcha, and pull you right back down. But the length of time that that inner critic grabs you and keeps you held captive is the difference. A few minutes versus a few hours versus a few days, right? Versus a few months. It begins to trend differently. And very few people probably would have been willing to go on a podcast and talk about it. So hats off to you for that.
Thank you.
And I would offer we could always put the podcast that we just recorded out on our YouTube membership. So if individuals want to hear it, we won't really be able to show them all of the beautiful camera angles. Sorry, it was my camera that they won't be able to see. But they'll at least be able to get all of the wonderful information. So it'll be available under the membership for YouTube. That way there can be something, a way that they can get access to it.
Yeah,
How
Heart
does
Leader
that sound?
Supporter, Heart Leader Plus, all of that. Yeah, no, we can absolutely do that. And yeah, this is definitely probably not the typical tool to use where you go through something and then go right on a podcast and put it out for the internet to
To listen to.
listen to. But it's still a good one. It definitely moved through, and but it's a good practice too, for something that honestly doesn't. There's other things going on in life that are far more taxing, that are serious, and really there are implications, and where there are mistakes, it's like that feeling is of self-deprecation. It almost feels tangible,
Yeah.
because it's like, because there is an implication to the action that is a lot more than just having to re-record something. Every time we experience something that isn't as impactful in terms of the result is still valuable. It is
Mhm.
practice. It's something that we used to, maybe a lot of people aren't aware of, or maybe the first time someone listening, but we used to actually help coach professional golfers.
Mhm.
And we talked about, the difference between being on the range and hitting golf balls and being on the course and hitting a golf ball, right?
Yep.
And a lot of people, there's this clear disconnect, because the range is very, very different. Something happens, you don't hit it right, you just scoop another ball and you hit again. On the course, I mean, I guess you could do that, but you definitely get penalized, and you're not gonna
Yeah.
reach
It's
the
not
goals of
looked at the
success that
same
you're
way.
looking
Yeah.
for. So it's a very different approach, right?
Yeah.
And a golf course looks very different than a range. It's very few sports where that's actually the case, where you practice is vastly different than where you actually play. And so, well, what is the constant, right? And it was kind of that idea of like, we talked with our players, and like, all the shots, whether you're on the practice range or in a tournament or in a practice round or anything, either all matter or none of them matter.
Yes.
And the problem is, what we do is we unintentionally place value on different things more than others. So, I've been there. I was playing, competitive golf. I put a lot more value on a shot that I hit on the golf course during a tournament than I did on the practice range. But when I started to play well is when I realized that shift, and I created an equal value. So every time I was on the practice range, even though the perceived value was that there really wasn't anything, because I could just scoop up another ball and hit again. But if there was intention behind it, and there was purpose, and there was value behind it, and I hit it the way I desired, then it still counted.
Yes.
And it got me closer to my goal. And then that could translate saying, okay, if I can do it here, then I can do it there. And so, even in these little moments, like what just happened with us and with me, there wasn't a lot, like none of our lives were on the line, nothing, I still value your time, and I still value what we do. And so there is a value to it. I was harder on myself than you were on me. Right.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, that's an opportunity for me to say, okay, in these times where I make a mistake, because we're not We're all going to make mistakes, and that's okay. How do we move through them? How do we create an equal value to best support us when there is something that is major, that is impactful, that could change your trajectory or really pivot something in our lives, where we can actually learn how to move through it and step up into it and grow from that experience versus let it define us through unintentional I am statements that aren't taking us anywhere.
That is so incredibly well said. And it just from the other side, and it's probably something that we don't think about when we are in the throes of kicking our own backside internally, right? I could feel you in there, just in an inner fight, like 1, 2 punching mentally yourself. And I wasn't upset at all. At all. It was like, okay, well, that just happened. We'll figure out what to do with the content we have. It'll still be okay. But for some reason, it felt like you were just so mad at yourself. And I wanted to hug you, I wanted to reassure you. But when there's that much of an inner struggle going on, I didn't know what best to do in order to be in support. And so I don't know that we think about that when we're inside going through it, but there is an impact to the people who are outside who do love us and want to support us, because it really is like Jim Carrey in Liar Liar when the person walked in the bathroom and he's like, "Do you mind?" Because it's like, okay, I can feel that you're doing that. And I don't know where to step in or if to step in, or like, if I offer you positivity, is it going to be like, leave me alone? Or if I offer silence, what do I do? And so that's where, if you can create that little gap, just that little gap, then someone that you care about might be able to enter in through that gap and help you in that fight, right? That little pause.
And this is a tough situation because
Mhm.
sometimes there's nothing you can do. In this situation, knowing that you were more okay with it than I am made me be like, what am I doing? So that was helpful. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing partner who doesn't hold little things like that against me. I don't think that's an experience that a lot of people have. And so when little things do happen, a lot of people blow up and they get mad at the other person, put them down. And so, uh, in some ways, it can be a defense mechanism to get so mad at yourself that the other person being mad is less than your own sense of madness towards yourself or anger
Mm.
towards yourself. And so if you're more angry than they are, then, no matter how angry they are, it's still not as much as you are. And so it's like a defense mechanism. As I'm talking about this real time, I'm realizing that to a degree that's still an area for personal growth, and that must still be in there as a defense mechanism for myself. So that's an opportunity, and I'm super grateful again that I do have a partner who doesn't hold that against me or put me down just from a simple little mistake that does have an impact, no matter how big or small. But a lot of people, I would say that would, like, if I was listening to this podcast and I've gone through the things that I've gone through, I'd be wanting to know, well, what do I do when I'm with someone who doesn't handle it well, who is outwardly angry towards me? What can I do to move through that? Because that makes it a lot more difficult.
Honestly, it would be an individual by individual basis. But if you're in a scenario where either your partner or a family member or even a friend, I had I grew up in a family that loved to make fun of each other, and it was all in good fun, right? It was never meant to be painful.
Until because someone got hurt, and then it got funnier.
Exactly.
That's the saying,
That is the saying.
right?
Um, and that was true, right? Like, and it was it was loving, but sometimes if you're not in the space for it, it can get painful,
Yeah.
right? And so that relentless teasing and making fun of, and what I finally found myself having to do when I was in those inner battles, and then I had brothers and their friends would just start picking on me and making fun of me, and I was already buried in it. I would have to get up, and sometimes, because there wasn't a lot of privacy in my house either, I would have to find a closet or somewhere where I could get any kind of privacy that I could in order to just breathe and get myself back to a place of neutrality. I wasn't going to get back to a place of positivity. That was too far of a goal. Like, I'm not going to go from here to here, but at least I could be in a quiet space without somebody coming at me in a way that I knew they meant to be funny, but wasn't funny to me given where I was mentally or emotionally. And I could breathe and get myself back to a space of neutrality and not cry or whatever else was going on, so that I could come back out and not punch them,
Mm.
to be quite honest.
Fair
I
enough.
grew up with all boys.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of another podcast that we had about creating our safe spaces and
Yeah.
how important that is. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tools in this area in terms of how to pivot and what to do and how you chose to react or not react is probably the better way to say it. So the only thing I can do is what I can direct myself. And so the more that I can be consistent in that, and the more that I can allow myself to flow through it, I can do my best to communicate like, hey, just let me feel it. I need a moment.
Just need a moment.
Just let me flow through it and then move through it, in a matter of moments, relatively speaking,
Mhm.
and then be ready to hop on and talk about it. It took me a long time to get to a point where I could do something like this.
Mhm.
And so, in the same way, we like just seeing our own successes in those areas, and like these things come up to or occur, not to annoy us, even though they sometimes feel very annoying, but sometimes they're being brought forward as a way to show us what we're capable of,
Yeah.
and that's a beautiful reminder.
You are capable of great things.
Yes, sometimes.
Yes.
Thank you, my love.
Thank you. And if you are looking for your own resource for achieving great things and getting out of that negative spin, fighting back against that villainous inner critic, this is an amazing resource. It is Silence Your Inner Critic. And you can hop on over to silenceyourinnercritic.com and order your copy. And when you do, you're going to get all kinds of fun bonus material, including an invite to the launch party, which is happening March 28th. You can attend virtually, you can attend in person. We just would love to celebrate with you. You'll also get so many cool tools and fun things to interact with, including a fun app. We cannot wait to just be your guy and gal and a whole team of other superheroes who have agreed to sit in the chair and be your guides all along the adventure. So hop on over, check it out, silenceyourinnercritic.com, sign up and begin the adventure today. And once you're done with that, pop on back over here and explore all of the fun, fantastic resources we have on the Heart Leader podcast.